let's look at kinesiology tape for functional fascial retraining. If we look at our intentions and what is our goal to treatment, this is where we're looking to stimulate the fascia in a certain position, a certain movement pattern to create better function in the tissue. So this is where the key words we're coming to are things like movement, ease, repatterning, where we look to create dynamic, fluid motion in a functional way. That's where we're looking to use kinesiology tape with a goal of stimulating the fascia in a functional pattern or train. So generally with this type of taping, it's multi-directional. It may not be A to B, it might not be cross-joint. It might also be multi-muscle. It might only affect parts of the muscle because it's more about fascial lines where they've become dysfunctional, distorted, and we want to create better movement in a certain pattern. So they're movement-driven tapings. We're looking where there's lack of movement or lack of ease of movement within the body, and we want to create a pull into a better movement or functional fascial line. So we're going to use recoil, but we want to use it to create a constant stimulation into a desired position or into a desired movement pattern. So in terms of the process, we're throwing those insertions and origins out the window because this is much more about anchoring and creating recoil against a fascial pattern, which is unique to that client. So as always, the process, the anchors have no tension on the tape, no stretch on the tissue. Then for that active tape, we want to put that target tissue on stretch. So this might be multi-joint movement. It might be multi-muscle. It might be, fascial train driven. We want to put that on stretch, and then we want to add a medium amount of stretch onto the tape because we want to create this constant pulling into the functional movement we want to create. Finally, we get the client to relax, and again we anchor with no tension on the tape. Here is the simplest of examples. It's stabilizing a winged scapula, so creating a recoil on that bottom corner of the scapula into a more neutral, not winged position. So I'm going to anchor a good 3-4 inches of tape around that lumbar junction. Then I'm going to pull back onto a medium tension, the active part of the tape. Now I'm going to ask my client to stretch that scapula away, and I'm going to lay that tape down across the bottom corner and onto the back of the scapula, and then simply anchor with no tension. So this is creating that constant, quite strong pull on the scapula back into a neutral position. Now let's look at a more complex example where there's multiple joints involved. So here, let's look at this client who has a thoracic rotation. So what you'll see here, the two red arrows, is one, that right QL, he's quite pinched to that right side, so it's much shorter than the left. And then what we also have on that right shoulder is that it's quite protracted, rounded and down. So what we get when we look at this client, especially from the side, is a rotation from the right towards the left. Now, looking at the green line, this is where we want to create a pull or a recoil too. So we want to create an anchor on that left hip that is going to pull that rotation away from being right to left, opening up back towards a neutral position. So that green line pretty much follows the line we're going to create recoil with using the kinesiology tape. So let's look at that taping in action. I'm going to use a 10cm piece of tape so that we cover and stimulate more fascia in that line, and also because this client is also quite tall. So I'm going to anchor at the back of the pelvis, and now I want to put all of the tissue of that line, the green line, on stretch. So I'm going to get my client to side bend to put that QL or that lumbar left side on stretch, and I'm going to put medium amount of stretch on the tape. Now I'm pausing halfway here because I want to change direction on the tape, so I'm just creating a midway anchor, And now my client is stretching that right shoulder away, putting it on stretch, so that I can then add a medium stretch to the tape and lay it down on the stretched target tissue. Get my client to relax and anchor in front of the chest with no tension. So now that black line is mimicking that green line, creating a constant recoil back towards a neutral position. So in summary, a functional fascial taping is multi-directional, it can be multi-muscle, and it's always movement driven. So it's about creating a recoil into the position or the movement that your client requires. And to summarize the process for a functional fascial taping, anchor with no tension on the tape, no stretch on the tissue. For the active portion of the tape, put the target tissue on stretch. Add a medium amount of tension on the tape so that we get a stronger stimulant or recoil effect. And finally, anchor with no tension on the tape, no stretch on the tissue.